To learn more about earning college credits with study hall courses, go to gostudyhall.com or click the link in the description. There are around 335 million people in the United States as of 2023. So unless you have a lot of time on your hands, you can't just ask every single person their opinion on something. But there are times when it's nice to have nationwide input, because it's good to know how the public feels about stuff. Luckily, there are ways to get accurate and reliable data without bothering literally everyone, and instead bothering just a segment of society, through polls. Polls are a measure of public opinion, and they're useful unless they suffer from fatal flaws that can usually be avoided with the right planning. But it's up to journalists and the media to report on polls in a responsible way, so they don't trick people into believing something that the polls never said. It's also on us to scrutinize who made the polls and why, so we don't get misled. Hi, I'm Carmela Boykin, and this is Study Hall, Power and Politics in U.S. Government. It's good for all of us to be able to identify signs of a reliable poll, and signs that a poll should be taken with a grain or boulder of salt. This is where our media and data literacy really gets put to the test. A good poll should have a clear question in mind, like who the next president might be. Ideally, polls should get responses from a random assortment of the target population in a process called random sampling. So then, the people who get sampled or questioned are more likely to represent the broader US population than if you just asked people like me, who are in the top 0.5% of Beyoncé listeners. But if pollsters aren't careful, they can get things really wrong. Way back in 1936, Literary Digest magazine polled their readers about the presidential election between Alfred Landon and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, aka FDR. The poll predicted that Landon would crush the competition, but FDR won in a landslide. He actually won every state except for Maine and Vermont, winning the highest percentage of the vote since 1820. Literary Digest wasn't just wrong, they were super wrong, and maybe coincidentally, maybe not, the magazine published its last issue in 1938. So to understand how Literary Digest could be so far off base, let's take a closer look at the way they conducted their poll. The most popular explanation is the magazine chiefly polled three groups of people: their own subscribers, car owners, and households with telephones, because car registration lists and telephone books, remember those, made these groups the easiest to contact. And in 1936, if people had a car, phone, or magazine subscription in the middle of the Great Depression, they had higher incomes than the average person, so they weren't very representative of US citizens at large. And that's a problem, because it turns out that rich people aren't the only ones who vote. So when an unrepresentative group is polled instead of a random smattering of people, we say there's a sampling bias. And that's bad, because it skews the data and reduces the reliability of the results. Now, more recent analyses of the Literary Digest polling failure suggest the long-standing sampling bias explanation is at best not the entire story, and at worst, a myth. Because while car and telephone owners were more pro-Landon than other groups, they were still strongly pro-Roosevelt. So what was probably a far bigger player in the failure was that for whatever reason, Landon voters wanted the world to know they were voting for Landon, while Roosevelt voters didn't feel the need to get that message out. And that meant the poll suffered from a non-response bias, which is when, for whatever reason, a group of people with similar characteristics don't take part of the survey or they drop out. But beyond these biases, there are a few more reasons why a candidate who's predicted to win still might lose, like the Bradley effect, named after a former Los Angeles mayor who many thought would be elected California governor in 1982 based on polls, until he lost. The Bradley effect says people might feel pressured by social norms to hide their real vote in polls. In Bradley's case, white people didn't want to admit they weren't voting for a black candidate over fears they'd be viewed as racist. This could help explain why 2016 polls didn't accurately predict the election. Because Donald Trump was such a wildly contentious candidate, some people were embarrassed to admit they were voting for him. But not everyone is convinced that's the most likely explanation. It might just be more standard polling errors, like missing large swaths of Trump voters. So to avoid these kinds of discrepancies, there are a few steps that we can take to make polls more reliable. If we want to create a scientific poll, or one that uses appropriate methods to collect reliable data, we first have to figure out what population we want to make predictions about. If we want to know if Meijer or Kroger is the better grocery store, we should go to parts of the Midwest where people have informed opinions about both. And if we want to predict presidential elections, then the group we're trying to poll is really the whole country. But we've already established that it's not possible to call everyone up, especially with caller ID and do not disturb. I don't know any young person who answers unknown calls, so good luck reaching that demographic if you're polling via random phone calls. So instead, some pollsters strive for representative sampling, which is where respondents reflect the group we're trying to make predictions about, rather than having some kind of bias. To be representative, our polls should reflect the makeup of all voters across the US. So if 51% of voters are women, then 51% of our survey respondents should be women too. We figured out what population we want to sample, but we're still only sampling a subset of that population. So the sample size, or the number of people that respond to the poll, becomes important. In general, the bigger the sample size, the better, though Literary Digest's 2 million plus respondents might beg to differ. But as long as we're getting a good representation of the population, as sample sizes go up, the margin of error goes down. It's basically the way we estimate the poll's accuracy, and the tax we pay for polling just a subset of a larger population. Like, if we had a margin of error of 2%, that tells us that if we did a similar poll over and over again, we'd expect the results to be within 2% of the actual value, though nothing is 100%, so there's still a chance you could get results outside that range. A final, crucial step towards making our polls scientific is to be transparent about the data we've collected. We need to include the question people were actually asked, report our sample size, and the survey method we use to collect data, like making random digit phone calls to numbers across the country. We should also provide details about the sampled population, like whether they're all adults or likely voters, meaning people who have a high probability of actually turning up to vote, or if they're just registered to vote, because some people may be registered but don't actively vote in elections. So likely voters are a bit smaller of a population. Most major election-based polls tend to focus on registered and likely voters because they're more reliable sources than people who've never voted or people who can't vote. Now, it can be a lot of work to make our polls scientific and reliable, so these practices aren't always followed. Non-scientific polls are pretty common, and they can give polls in general a bad rep. So it's crucial we're able to recognize red flags and know which polls to avoid trusting and reposting. Some polls are created in a way that's intentionally unreliable because they want to produce results that benefit the pollsters themselves rather than actually get useful data. First, you have push polls, which aren't really polls at all, but a way to damage a candidate under the guise of polling. One technique that push polls use is deceptive or leading questions, which are phrased in a certain way to achieve the desired outcome. Like in the 2000 Republican primary in South Carolina between John McCain and George W. Bush. Unidentified pollsters called and asked, would you be more or less likely to vote for John McCain for president if you knew he'd fathered an illegitimate black child? This leading question misrepresented McCain's adoption of a child from Bangladesh and played into the racism of local voters with the intent of turning them away from McCain. Some people suspect that Bush's campaign was behind the poll, but they've consistently denied their involvement. Beyond push polls, there are other examples of non-scientific polls, like straw polls, which are informal surveys of non-random groups of people, and the results don't affect anything. Like when I ask my friends who they think is going to win Love Island. Just because we love an islander doesn't mean the other islanders do too. There are also exit polls, which happen as people are leaving the voting place. Here, pollsters are trying to get an early lead on election results because actual results can take up to a day or more to count. Exit polls strive to use scientific approaches, like hitting multiple voting locations to match the population, or contacting people who voted early or by mail in order to get a more representative sample. But one issue is that people are polled as they're leaving their voting locations, and they usually vote in community spaces that are close to their home. Because of their geographic limitations, individual exit polls aren't necessarily representative of voters across the US. But since the first major exit poll in 1967, they've become way more popular, making it more important than ever that people are aware of how these polls can be misused in order to influence our political decisions. When polls are created and used responsibly, they give the public an opportunity to share their opinions with their local, state, and federal representatives. It's good for our elected officials to have a clear understanding of our interests and concerns so that they know where to focus their limited time and energy in their legislative work. That's what makes our representative democracy representative. But polls can be problematic when they're non-scientific and they get big things like elections all wrong. Not only is that confusing, but it can end up impacting the public's perceptions of polls altogether. And that can ultimately discourage voter turnout. If someone's top candidate is predicted to lose by a substantial amount, they might lose their motivation to show up to vote at all. Since there's more and more talk about polls on the news and social media, we're susceptible to the biases and sensationalism that can come along with reporting. It turns out that negative and inflammatory results, especially when paired with polarization across party lines, can drive clicks and increase advertising dollars for companies. So yes, companies, you are the drama. And that means companies are incentivized to share things that make their viewers upset. And polls with their scientific seeming data can easily be used to stir the pot. So it's on us to get better at discerning their results, like figuring out how they were made, who made them, and why. There are some independent polling firms like Gallup and Pew that are known for creating reliable and apolitical polls, but there are also a bunch of organizations running their own polls or purposely presenting results in a misleading way to reinforce their own political agenda. Carefully choosing what kinds of media we consume can help to reduce the influence of misleading polls, but it's a constant battle, meaning if you don't take the steps to check that a poll's reliable, you run the risk of being misled. As informed citizens, we have the power to judge what polls really say, rather than just what we're told they say. If you're enjoying Study Hall Power and Politics in U.S. Government and are interested in taking an online course and earning college credit, go to gostudyhall.com or click on the button to learn more. Thanks for watching and see you next time.